Welcome to NTD News Today. Here are today's top stories. Congresswoman Elisa Stefanik will face questions from senators at her confirmation hearing. She is President Trump's nominee to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. We have the latest from Capitol Hill.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
And good morning. Today is Tuesday, January 21st. I'm Don Ma. First up, the nominations process for the other picks of President Trump will move forward this week. Today, former Georgia Congressman Doug Collins will testify before lawmakers to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs. Congresswoman Elisa Stefanik will also face lawmakers in her bid to become UN ambassador. Stefanik has long been one of Trump's most loyal allies in the House. She was among those discussed as a potential vice presidential choice. And as one of his first acts in office, President Trump signed several executive orders at the Capital One Arena and even more back at the Oval Office. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has details on the slew of actions the president has already taken.
On President Trump's first day back in the Oval Office, he isn't holding back. He's already signed several executive orders on everything from repealing former President Biden's policies to eliminating gender ideology from public schools.
So we're going to sign executive orders. First, I'll revoke nearly 80 destructive and radical executive actions of the previous administration.
He rolled back requirements on vehicle emissions, DEI initiatives in the federal government, and bans on offshore oil and gas leases. And he's once again withdrawn the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord.
I'm immediately withdrawing from the unfair, one-sided Paris Climate Accord ripoff. The United States will not sabotage our own industries while China pollutes with impunity.
As for slimming down the federal government, the president is pausing new regulations by federal agencies, freezing all federal hiring except for essential areas like the military, and requiring federal workers to return full-time in person.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have a directive to every department and agency in the federal government to address the cost of living crisis that has cost Americans so dearly.
Trump also signed an order that ends, quote, weaponization of the government and another order preventing censorship of free speech. He put more than 1,000 Biden administration appointees on notice after midnight, writing, "My presidential personnel office is actively in the process of identifying and removing over 1,000 presidential appointees from the previous administration who are not aligned with our vision to make America great again." As for immigration, the president declared a national emergency at the southern border.
This is a proclamation guaranteeing the state's protection against invasion based on the current crisis at the southern border.
He's also revived border wall construction and his Remain in Mexico policy, and designated drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And his order to address the definition of birthright citizenship has already been met with a lawsuit. A crowd flooded the D.C. jail late Monday as Trump pardoned some 1,500 January 6th defendants.
We hope they come out tonight, frankly. They're expecting it.
Several January 6th prisoners left the D.C. jail last evening. Other executive orders expanded Alaska's energy production, kept TikTok alive, and withdrew from the World Health Organization. In addition to those executive orders that Trump signed just hours after taking the oath of office, well, the new Trump White House has listed a four-pronged list of priorities: safety, affordability, and energy, draining the swamp, and bringing back American values. So this is what we can expect to see over the next 4 years of this new Trump administration. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Vice President J.D. Vance has sworn in Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. The Senate voted last night to confirm Rubio just hours after Trump's inauguration. NTD's Daniel Monahan has the report.
The nomination of the great Senator Marco Rubio from the state of Florida is confirmed.
Rubio, the former Republican senator from Florida, is the first cabinet official of the new Trump administration to receive Senate approval. His nomination was overwhelmingly bipartisan, with a decisive 99-0 vote.
I've had a good working relationship with Senator Rubio for many years, and I was very impressed at his hearing by his grasp of policy.
The Marco's qualifications are unchallengeable.
Rubio called the confirmation a great honor and expressed gratitude for the support of his former colleagues. As Secretary of State, Rubio has pledged to focus on confronting the Chinese Communist Party, which he described as the most potent and dangerous adversary America has ever faced. China dominates critical mineral supplies, essential in industries such as electronics, energy, and defense. In Washington, there is bipartisan concern over the regime's military aggression towards its neighbors, covert influence operations, and human rights suppression even reaching into the United States.
If we stay on the road we're on right now, in less than 10 years, virtually everything that matters to us in life will depend on whether China will allow us to have it or not.
Hearings are still pending for several other high-profile nominees, including Tulsi Gabbard for National Intelligence Director, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, and Kash Patel for FBI Director. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
The Senate confirmation hearing for UN Ambassador nominee Elisa Stefanik is now underway. We're going to tune in now.
Do you want to do your introduction? I know you both have important things you have to do. Your choice.
Let our colleagues go, Mr. Chairman, if I may speak. Let our colleagues go. Don't do that to them.
It's not that we want you out of here.
Right.
Can we go?
Shelley, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Risch and Ranking Member Shaheen for welcoming me to the committee. And I want to thank my good friend, Elisa Stefanik, for honoring me today to have the privilege to introduce her before this distinguished committee. And I also want to say what a privilege it is to share the podium with my friend Tom Cotton. Congratulations also to both of you, your positions on this committee. It is truly an honor to be here to introduce someone who I admire greatly. The job she has been selected to carry out for President Trump is not an easy one, but it is extremely important. In its early formation, it was believed that the United Nations required U.S. leadership in both its creation and in the actual business of the organization to prevent conflict and to advance freedom. But lately, when many of us look at the United Nations, this body that is meant to advance values of peace and freedom and human dignity, we don't see those American values reflected. We see rampant anti-Semitism against the world's only Jewish state as it faces attacks from all directions. We see oppression and aggressive autocrats celebrated and elevated to leadership positions. We see China, Russia, and Iran empowered at this organization to advance their values, not the values of peace and freedom that Americans stand for. It is clear that the need to reestablish U.S. leadership at this broken institution, that we need to do that. I cannot think of anyone more qualified or more ready to fulfill that role than my friend, Elisa Stefanik. I've known Elisa for several years during her career in public service, and I am excited to highlight her qualifications for this important role for which she has been nominated. As a member of the House of Representatives, she has shown remarkable leadership. As a member of both the Armed Services and Intelligence Committee, she's shown an exceptional command of national security issues. Elisa understands the dangerous world and the growing threats that our country faces, and she has the strength and the skill to reassert U.S. leadership on the world stage, a world stage that needs moral clarity and leadership now more than ever. Elisa has shown that moral clarity by exposing, she has shown her moral clarity by exposing anti-Semitism on our college campuses. She has shown that moral clarity by posting on social media every single day about the innocent hostages taken by Hamas during the horrific attacks of October the 7th, more than 450 days later. The United Nations is a tough place. Well, Elisa is from New York, but Elisa has never backed down from a challenge. At the time of her first congressional election, she was the youngest woman ever elected to the Congress in the United States history. She went on to become the youngest woman ever to serve in elected House leadership. And she will confidently and skillfully execute for President Trump and for all of the American people at the United Nations. Additionally, on a personal level, Elisa is a good mother, You can see her son, Sam, back here, and she's such a good mother that they have Legos on the hold, ready to go. A great wife, a great daughter, and a wonderful friend. Her steady hand and genuine caring nature, combined with her fierce intellect, will bring exactly that person that President Trump and our nation needs at the United Nations. I look forward to voting to support her when I have the chance, and I thank all of you for the opportunity to have her before you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Capito. Well said. Senator Cotton.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Shaheen, colleagues, it's my honor to join Senator Capito today in introducing my friend and colleague, Elisa Stefanik, as the nominee for Ambassador to the United Nations. Elise has an outstanding record of fighting for America's interests at home and abroad, and I urge members of this committee to confirm her swiftly and hopefully unanimously. The United Nations today has many problems. Chief among them are communist Chinese influence and incessant targeting of Israel. From weeding out anti-Semitism to opposing harmful Chinese and Russian policies, the next UN ambassador must help restore sanity to the United Nations. And I can think of no better person for this role than Elise. In Congress, she has unapologetically stood up to our adversaries and will do the same at the United Nations. As a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee and the House Intelligence Committee, Elise understands the stakes of our competition with Communist China. She helped stand up the China Task Force in the House, which later became the bipartisan Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. She also led comprehensive legislation to deter China and strengthen the United States. I've had the privilege of partnering with Elise on several of these bills, including one to ban Chinese-owned tutoring companies at our Department of Defense and another to counter Chinese drones in America. I'm also confident in Elisa's ability to stand up for Israel against the United Nations' often blatant anti-Semitism. She has long advocated for billions of dollars for Israeli capabilities like the life-saving Iron Dome and critical anti-tunneling technology. Her questioning of college presidents in defense of Jewish students set off shockwaves around higher education, resulting in the resignation of the Harvard and University of Pennsylvania presidents. She's also been a tireless advocate for hostages taken by Hamas. Elise has dedicated her career to public service. She started out working in the Bush White House before joining Congress to serve the people of Northern New York. To her constituents, she's best known for working across the aisle to improve the lives of New Yorkers. At the UN, I know that she will continue to put Americans first. I commend President Trump for this nomination, and I'm grateful to Elise for once again answering the call of duty. I'd also like to thank her family, whose steadfast support has led her to this moment. Elise and her husband Matt are parents to their 3-year-old son Sam, who is apparently departing at this very moment. I'm sure that one day Sam will look at this moment and Elisa's future service with much to be proud of, even if today, like my boys, he thinks it's mostly boring politics stuff. Yeah. So today I'm here to happily and proudly offer my strong support to this dedicated public servant and American patriot, our next ambassador to the United Nations, Elisa Stefanik. She's the right person for the job, and I encourage all of my colleagues on the committee and in the Senate to process her nomination promptly and unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Senator Cotton, and again, well said. So both of you, I know you've got things that you've got to attend to, and we appreciate you coming to the committee and helping us out. Representative Stefanik, welcome to our committee. You'll find us kind and generous most of the time, and we look forward to hearing from you. Senator Shaheen and I are going to make a few remarks, and then we'll yield to you and hear what you have to say. First of all, let me start by saying there is great difficulty at the United Nations today, and I'm confident President Trump's nominee can help bring much-needed change. This is widely recognized by people here up on the Hill. Senator Cotton, Senator Capito both made reference to it. I know you're well aware of it. One of the unfortunate things, and maybe this hearing will help, is the vast majority of the American people do not recognize the deterioration that has happened at the United Nations and how it has strayed from its original purposes. There is great difficulty there. I think that we need significant change. As threats from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran continue to grow, Representative Stefanik, your position will be at the heart of the U.S. efforts to stand up to the authoritarian axis that seeks to undermine the United States at every turn and to ensure our partners and allies are also doing their part. I know you're up to that task. The UN was founded to be a force for peace and stability in the world, an admirable goal. It's not working. Since its founding, the United States has helped shape the UN and has supported it in dollars, lots and lots and lots of dollars, and in spirit. But today, the United States remains the largest funder of the UN system. We pay 22% of the regular budget, and we pay 25% of the peacekeeping budget. And what have the American people gotten for these investments? They have chaos, complete dysfunction at the UN, and a warped sense of right and wrong. In place of needed reform, the U.S. is constantly asked to give more to the UN, but over time the organization has drifted farther away from American values, putting American national security in jeopardy. Representative Stefanik, I know that President Trump has nominated you to the UN because he knows you're not afraid to stand up for the American people, ensure that taxpayer dollars are truly putting America first, and push back against the real problems, constant problems, that plague the United Nations. As the UN has expanded its mission, the amount of conflict, waste, fraud, and abuse has grown. In the UN Security Council, which is charged with maintaining international peace, security, consensus, and partnership on the many issues world faces, has become a fantasy. Critical issues that demand the Council's attention fall to the wayside. Accountability for Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, China's grotesque human rights abuses, genocide in the Sudan, regime change in Syria, all go unaddressed, but by what is supposed to be the leading international organization to resolve these conflicts. As the authoritarian axis grows and competes against democratic nations, the UN will descend back into the paralysis that has marked the Cold War if it continues on its course, which it has no indication it is changing. To make matters worse, our adversaries have weaponized the UN against Americans and democratic interests. Prior to the fall of Assad, Putin used the Security Council to block any action to hold Assad regime accountable for its crimes against humanity. China has used its malign influence to block attempts to discuss the Chinese government-sponsored genocide against the Uyghurs, and they have blocked our ally, Taiwan, from fully participating in the UN. China also manipulates the UN personnel system, which we all know, and they've used it to install Chinese diplomats into the UN bureaucracy that only serve China's goals and interests. There is a deep anti-Israel bias within the United Nations that has only grown stronger since Hamas's horrendous, unprovoked attack against Israel on October 7th. This sentiment was spearheaded by the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, which had numerous employees participate in October 7th terrorist attacks and allowed its schools and facilities to be used by Hamas. Remember, these are U.S. tax dollars that partially help fund UNRWA. For years, I have led my colleagues on legislation to end the U.S. contributions to this anti-Semitic organization, which openly employs terrorists. UNRWA must go. What I've just described is not what the American people want out of their taxpayer dollars. Our contributions should serve America's interests first, and I know you will bring that message to the United Nations system loud and clear. Representative Stefanik, I believe it is reasonable to evaluate every UN agency to determine if what they are doing is directly beneficial to America and hold them until the answer is a resounding yes. Anything less should not be tolerated. If these agencies cannot be changed, and at this point, the U.S. should seriously examine if further contributions and indeed participation in the UN is even beneficial to the American people. I'm interested to hear your plans for change at the UN, and I look forward to seeing the tremendous work I know that you will do for our country and to make the world a safer place for future generations. Thank you. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Congresswoman Stefanik. Welcome to your family, who's with you today as well. Now, whether fighting the spread of infectious diseases or stemming the flow of fentanyl that kills Americans, combating transnational crime that costs Americans billions of dollars, negotiating political settlements to dangerous conflicts, the work of the United Nations directly affects Americans all across this country. We benefit from UN peacekeeping missions that would otherwise fall to the American military. We are better off because of efforts to stabilize societies and provide life-saving assistance in places like Sudan, Syria, and Ukraine. And we don't just do this out of the goodness of our hearts. We fund these efforts because they make Americans, as Secretary Rubio said in his hearing, safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Equally important, if we don't do it, our adversaries and competitors will. Representative Stefanik, welcome again to this committee. Congratulations on your nomination to be U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. From working in the Bush administration on the Domestic Policy Council to being the youngest woman elected to Congress, you have strong credentials and the relevant experience for this role. But today I'd really like to hear your vision for the United States at the United Nations. I've certainly taken note of the skepticism in the United Nations expressed by others in the incoming administration and also expressed by your introducers today and Chairman Risch. In the past, you have voted to defund the United Nations and its specialized agencies. Certainly, I would agree that the United Nations is an imperfect body, but the UN is also a force multiplier of American taxpayer money. U.S. disengagement is something our adversaries want, especially Russia and China. At his hearing last week, Secretary Rubio said China is our most potent and dangerous adversary, and Beijing's contribution to the UN is almost 7 times what it was 2 decades ago. China has had great success increasing the number of nationals employed at the UN, and so when we cut back, they are ready and very eager to fill that void. Under the first Trump administration, the U.S. withdrew from UNESCO, an agency that, among many things, combats anti-Semitism and establishes international technology standards that affect our industries. When we stepped back, Beijing stepped in and is now UNESCO's largest financial contributors. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on how the U.S. can compete with China across every United Nations agency. One agency at the UN that I think is particularly important is the UN Population Fund, or UNFPA. Globally, 1 in every 5 girls is married before reaching age 18. Too many girls in too many countries, as you know very well, face female genital mutilation and forced child marriage. UNFPA provides critical reproductive and maternal care. It reaches 3 times as many countries as our bilateral family planning program. And in some areas like Darfur and Kordofan, it is the main provider of life-saving reproductive health supplies. Things like childbirth delivery kits that reduce infection for women giving birth outside clinical settings. I believe its work is irreplaceable. Now, if confirmed, I hope we can work together to advance United States interests at the UN. Because when the United States takes a leadership role at the UN, Americans and people around the world are better off. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome the testimony of Congresswoman Stefanik and hearing her views.
Thank you so much, Senator Shaheen. And Representative Stefanik, the floor is yours.
Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, distinguished members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. I would also like to thank the senators from both sides of the aisle who met with me over the past several weeks. It is the honor of my lifetime to earn President Trump's nomination to serve in his cabinet as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. If confirmed, I stand ready to implement President Trump's mandate from the American people to deliver America First, peace through strength, national security leadership on the world stage. Before I begin, I'd like to personally recognize my family. We all know in public office that we would not have the opportunity to serve were it not for the support of our loved ones. I'd like to begin with my mom, dad, and brother, Melanie, Ken, and Maddie. My dad was here with me today, and my mom and brother are watching closely from upstate New York. There is no question that I would not be here without their lifetime of unconditional love, support, and encouragement, and for that, I am forever grateful. I also want to thank my incredibly supportive husband, Matt, who is also here, and of course, most importantly, our pride and joy, our 3-year-old son, Sam, who made his debut in the U.S. Senate. He is comfortable on the House side, it's new in the Senate, so thank you for the warm welcome. Sam is by far our greatest blessing. Of all the titles I have held, Congresswoman, Chairwoman, Representative, or Ambassador if confirmed, my most important title will always be Mom. I appear before you today as a daughter, sister, wife, mother, Congresswoman, a patriotic upstate New Yorker, and a proud American. I believe deeply in the American dream because I've had the opportunity to live it. I was born and raised in upstate New York, the cradle of the American Revolution. I grew up in a small business family where my parents instilled in me the importance of hard work, ingenuity, and grit. I was blessed to be the first member of my immediate family to have the opportunity to graduate from college. I graduated from Harvard with honors and then worked at the White House, in the West Wing, on the Domestic Policy Council, and in the Chief of Staff's office. After nearly a decade working in public policy in Washington, I returned home to work in my family's small business and decided to run for Congress. In 2014, I was elected to Congress, making history as the youngest woman ever elected at the time. In Congress, I have fought tirelessly for the hardworking families of New York's 21st District, delivering significant bipartisan results for my constituents. I was elected by my colleagues to serve as the House Republican Conference Chair, becoming the highest-ranking woman in Congress at the time and the youngest woman of either party to serve in top elected House leadership. And over the last decade, I have served on the House Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the House Education and Workforce Committee, and I'm proud to be the longest-serving woman on both the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. On these national security committees, I have legislated on a number of critical issues ranging from military readiness, emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and cybersecurity, to missile defense. I have worked to enhance American intelligence capabilities, strengthen our alliances and partnerships, and deter our adversaries. On the Education Committee, I have been the leader in combating anti-Semitism in higher education. My oversight work led to the most viewed testimony in the history of Congress. This hearing with university presidents was heard around the world and viewed billions of times because it exposed the anti-Semitic rot in colleges and universities and was a watershed moment in American higher education. When discussing this nomination with President Trump, the president shared with me that he sees great promise in the United Nations if it focuses on its founding mission of international peace and security. President Trump has long advocated for peace and no new wars. He delivered the Abraham Accords, the largest step to regional peace in the Middle East in a quarter century. If confirmed, I will work to ensure that our mission to the United Nations serves the interests of the American people and represents President Trump's America First, peace through strength foreign policy. As the world faces crisis after crisis, with hostages, including Americans, still held in Hamas's captivity, to national security challenges ranging from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, it has never been more critical for the United States to lead with strength and moral clarity. This is especially important regarding our most precious ally, Israel, who faced the bloodiest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust on October 7th, 2023. As a member of Congress, I also understand deeply that we must be good stewards of U.S. taxpayer dollars. The U.S. is the largest contributor to the UN by far. Our tax dollars should not be complicit in propping up entities that are counter to American interests, anti-Semitic, or engaging in fraud, corruption, or terrorism. We must invest in programs to strengthen our national security and deliver results. To increase the efficacy of UN programs, we must drive reform. If confirmed, I will be the first UN ambassador in over 2 decades to come directly from Congress, and I have deep respect and understanding of the oversight and appropriations role of the legislative branch, and I look forward to using my strong House and Senate relationships to deliver these much-needed reforms. We are truly at a critical point in history. The world must be reminded of the key mission of the United Nations and America's role as its formative leader. Following the devastation, carnage, and Holocaust of World War II, the world was desperate for peace, stability, human rights and dignity, and world order. As outlined in Article 1, Chapter 1 of the UN Charter, the purpose of the United Nations is to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations based on a shared respect for the principle of equal rights, solve international problems, and harmonize the actions of nations in the attainment of common ends. The UN has not lived up to this founding mission, and we must demand better. It is imperative to ensure strong American leadership at the United Nations. I share President Trump's vision of a UN reformed by strong America first, peace through strength, and a return to this founding mission of promoting peace and security around the world. In closing, I will forever be grateful to my constituents in New York's 21st District for giving me the opportunity to serve them as their voice at the highest levels of Congress. 10 years ago, upstate and North Country voters took a chance on a young, first-time, unknown candidate who very few believed could win. So I just want to thank the hardworking families, small businesses, farms, law enforcement officers, military families, veterans, seniors, so many with whom I've had worked so closely to deliver results on behalf of our communities. Thank you especially to my extraordinarily dedicated staff in both the district and in Washington offices for serving tirelessly for the past decade. If confirmed, my family and I are excited for this next chapter to serve on President Trump's cabinet in this role, and I commit to the American people that I will work my very hardest in the coming years to lead with moral clarity and American values. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Congressman. We appreciate those remarks, and what we're going to do now is we're going to do a round of questions. We're going to do 5-minute questions. The ranking member and I have discussed that and agreed to that. That doesn't mean it's going to end it. We're going to attempt to do another 5-minute round for those who are anxious to have more questions answered. So with that, let me start. First of all, I was impressed to hear what President Trump has always insisted on and has certainly talked to us about, and that is the fact that the founding mission of the UN is such a bright and brilliant light. The difficulty is the execution of their mission bears no resemblance to what their original mission was, which is really unfortunate. And we have in the past, and I hope in the future, rely more and more on doing bilateral and multilateral agreements with other countries without the United Nations, and to perform some of the things that the United Nations is attempting to do ourselves. We're the United States of America. We can do anything, and we certainly can perform those functions. The best example I can give you is the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords are probably going to be looked at in history as a turning point in the Middle East. It was done under President Trump last time. It was President Trump's administration who was the leading force on this, and the United Nations had absolutely nothing to do with it. And it is a great success in the Middle East, or a place where you see very few great successes. So we can do these things. We put a tremendous amount of money into the United Nations to do things that we can do. For instance, feeding folks. We do a lot of it ourselves through USAID, but we do a lot through the UN. In doing that, the UN has hired, for instance, UNRWA to do it, an organization I don't want anything to do with. I don't want any connection to UNRWA. And yet, here we are working with them. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to start with. that will ratchet down the number of people that are clogging the New York streets up there with employees from other places, and make it a mission that's our own. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Chairman Risch. I wanted to point out, and I'm glad you referenced the Abraham Accords. I think we can look to the success of our bilateral relationships and various multilateral partnerships and build on that within the UN. For example, we have the Abraham Accords caucus in the Congress. I think we should consider starting an Abraham Accords caucus within the United Nations to build on President's success delivering that historic result, the greatest breakthrough for normalization in the Middle East in over a quarter of a century. I do share your commitment, Chairman Risch, to being good stewards of U.S. taxpayer dollars and ensuring all of our investments to any foreign policy strategy, and this goes hand in hand what Secretary Rubio testified, represents our American interests. Does it make America safer? Does it make America stronger? And does it make America more prosperous? So I hope to work effectively with this committee, our oversight members and our appropriators to ensure that we deliver reform and ensure that each dollar is going to strengthen our national security. I think we can look to the programs that are successes, which typically have strong American leadership and voluntary funding. One example is the World Food Program, which has significant bipartisan support on this committee in both chambers of Congress, and it's supported by the American people. And oftentimes, the most successful agencies within the UN, they have transparency, accountability standards, and are led either with strong American leadership or allied countries. So that's a bit of feedback to your question.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Just very quickly, one of the things that has really concerned me in recent years is we keep getting outvoted at the UN. And it turns out that every country has one vote. And then when you look around and you look at these countries that are voting against us, you find out that you got the Chinese in there spreading money throughout their government, to individuals in their government, to projects in these dinky little countries, and they buy their vote. This is a real problem, and it's the kind of thing that gets us to the point where we can't even get a resolution that condemns Russia for their invasion of Ukraine in absolute violation of the foundations of the United Nations. And when the Secretary General comes to see me, I always crank on him and say, look, you guys can't even get a resolution condemning this. What are you doing for us? How are you making this work? And I get a word salad in response. Your thoughts on this problem with the Chinese buying off these smaller countries?
It is no question, Chairman Risch, that the CCP has made significant inroads. This is a long-term strategy that they have at the United Nations, and we need to have strong American leadership working with our allies to push back on this. As you pointed out, every country, no matter what its size, gets one vote. I believe we need to have a strategy to push back, particularly on the CCP's inroads within the global south and even within the Western Hemisphere. I think we need to build on our, as you said, bilateral partnerships and make sure they understand the importance of a two-way partnership with the United States. I also think that the personnel strategy of the CCP has been of particular concern within the UN.
Clearly.
China has made inroads in placing CCP leaders and Chinese diplomats in positions as head of various sub-UN agencies, but also at the most junior level. So we need to have a human capital strategy working with our allies to push back on that.
I appreciate your thoughts in that regard. And I certainly have no objection to countries having a vote. What bothers me is that the corruption and the fraud when the Chinese buy off that vote with money is just flat wrong. Thank you for your thoughts. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you. Again, Congresswoman Stefanik, welcome, and thank you for your willingness to continue to serve this country and for your past service in the House. While I think we would all agree that the UN is not perfect, it is a force multiplier for the U.S., and it's a prime example of global burden sharing in times of crisis. I was pleased to see that the Trump administration will maintain this position, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, as a cabinet-level position. Now, you've talked a little bit about this already in your responses, but how will you make sure that the work of the UN is understood to help advance U.S. interests around the world? And more important, how can you help convince members of Congress who are skeptics that our contributions and leadership in UN agencies must continue in order to prevent China, Russia, Iran, and other U.S. adversaries from assuming these roles?
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Shaheen. I appreciated our opportunity to visit ahead of time. I will start with your question related to how we convince the American people and elected officials of the importance of investments. I think, as I pointed out to Chairman Risch, doing a review of all of our dollars going into various UN agencies and looking at what are most effective. Typically, UNICEF is another example, in addition to World Food Program. We voluntary commit, it maintains bipartisan support, and it delivered significant results for millions around the globe, and it strengthens our national security. So when it comes to those key questions, does it make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous? I believe those are examples of programs that do. I clearly think there are certain programs that are not meeting the mission of the UN, the founding principles. UNRWA is an example, and we will likely have a policy disagreement upon that. But I think we need to roll our sleeves up, deliver reforms, and make sure that our dollars are going to programs within the UN that work, that have a basis in the rule of law, that have a basis in transparency and accountability, and strengthen our national security and our partnerships.
Well, thank you. I would point out that right now, we're not funding UNRWA.
Absolutely, and I voted to defund UNRWA.
One of the things I talked about in my opening statement was UNFPA. So the opportunity to provide family planning, maternal health care, midwife training, interventions to halt child marriage, to address the practice of female genital mutilation, and to help ensure healthy families. Will you commit to personally reviewing UNFPA's work before the administration makes any decision about invoking the Kim Kasten law?
Yes, if confirmed, I am committed to doing a review, as I said, across the UN programs, but specifically UNFPA. I think it's very important that we do a full review, as the President announced the executive order today as well regarding all of foreign aid, and I would make sure that we are being good stewards of U.S. taxpayer dollars. I do want to point out I have a very strong record when it comes to standing up for women's health issues, particularly addressing maternal mortality rates, addressing pre- and postnatal care, addressing infant malnutrition, and I think that is very important, and that you have my commitment to do that review if confirmed.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your record on that, and I think it's very important to remind everyone that women make up half of the world's population, and we need to do what we can to ensure that their health is also protected. In April, you said that Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine constituted genocide, April of 2022. You called for the delivery of security assistance to Ukraine. At the UN, we've seen inconsistent support for Ukraine. We've seen greater support on initiatives to support Ukraine and less support on initiatives to hold Russia accountable. If confirmed, can you talk about how you might use your role as UN ambassador to address and punish Russia's ongoing attempted genocide in Ukraine?
I support President Trump's commitment to bringing this war to a resolution, to stop the killing, and he campaigned on that issue, and he feels very deeply, and I support that. And I believe it falls squarely in line with the founding mission of the United Nations to bring international peace and security. If you look at my record over the course of my time on the House Armed Services Committee and the House Intelligence Committee, I have a very strong record when it comes to deterring Russia, pushing back on Russia, including during President Trump's term, voting for defensive lethal aid to Ukraine. I believe peace through strength is our strongest deterrence, and I'm very proud that during President Trump's first term, it was the only president where Putin did not invade another country because of that strong peace through strength leadership and the rebuilding that we passed through the National Defense Authorization Act and President Trump signed into law. So I think our effort should be my effort will be supporting President Trump's mission to bring that to a resolution and to deter Russia in the long term.
And so how do we hold Russia accountable for some of the human rights abuses that have happened in Ukraine, for their destruction of infrastructure in the country, for the lives that are lost? Clearly, this is a war that is only Vladimir Putin's initiative that has started. So are there things we can do at the UN that will hold Russia accountable?
Certainly, it's going to be important to support President Trump's approach with his special envoy to address and bring that to a resolution. And I will work with the National Security Council and my colleagues in the cabinet who sit in the national security spaces to use this position at the United Nations to support his strategy and give him maximum flexibility to bring this to a resolution. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Stefanik, welcome to the committee, and thank you very much for stopping by my office so we could have a chance to talk before this committee. And I really appreciate your service to our country and look forward to the strong credentials you bring to the table to be our UN ambassador. Winston Churchill said that the UN was set up not to get us to heaven, but only to save us from hell. And we've talked about the corruption that's going on there, the mismanagement, the rot, and so forth. And you've mentioned already this concept that we have to have reform there. That's going to be very important. And we've also talked about how much American taxpayers put into the UN, $18 billion a year. And to put that in perspective, in 2022, that was more than 185 other member nations combined. Chairman Risch mentioned what the percentages of 22% of their overall budget most recently and so forth. So we invest a lot there. We've talked about these reforms. Do you believe that we can leverage the money that we're putting into the UN to drive the reform? So, for example, can we say to the UN, hey, we're going to put money into these programs if, for example, they establish some of the transparency you were talking about. And if you don't do that, we're pulling our money out. Is that one of the ways that we can drive reforms?
Absolutely, and I believe we have to. We owe that to American taxpayers to ensure that all of our dollars and investment represent our values and answer the key questions of, does it make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous? So that is really important to me as an elected official currently, representing. I understand we have to be good stewards of U.S. taxpayer dollars. So I think that is a key tool for us to demand greater reforms and transparency.
Great. One of the other things that we've also talked about as well is how Communist China has used the UN to push its interests, and the chairman laid out some of the problems with what Communist China is doing. What can we do to be able to get more U.S. leadership into these different committees to kind of combat that?
We need to have a strategy, and this came up in virtually every conversation with senators from both sides of the aisle, and it needs to be a long-term strategy working closely with our allies and our partners, both at the most junior levels and at the more senior levels within the UN. We need to make sure that we're running candidates, either American or allied nations, in the elections process for key leadership posts within the UN system. We need to pay particular attention, I believe, to the technical organizations, whether it's telecommunications, whether it's civil aviation. And another way is we need to ensure Taiwan has maximum meaningful participation in international organizations. I also believe it's important to ensure that the language, because we have seen China trying to insert their specific language, which is counter to our values. We need to have very strong Mandarin expertise and really keep a close eye on that as well in all the documents and statements coming out of the UN system writ large.
So do you have specific plans to be able to start recruiting more Americans or allied nations people into the UN to be able to do it? And I'm going to kind of add on to that, because if you go back to, I think, between 2009 and 2021, the Communist China has increased its employment of its nationals in the UN by 85%. So it's not just about leadership of different agencies, but it's also about how many people just work there in the UN that, of course, we'd be naive to think that they're not driving Communist China's agenda through the UN, whatever role they have. So can you talk a little about how the strategy for getting more people leadership, but also how do we recruit more Americans or other allied people just to do the work of the regular UN?
I think we have to have a mission to recruit at the most junior levels to work their way up into the system. I also think we need to have a strategy working with Secretary Rubio to ensure that we have the highest caliber, which we do, of course, in terms of those that are serving at the U.S.-UN mission, and also provide that expertise of challenges within the Indo-PACOM region. I think that is very important. And I intend to also have opportunities to partner with, whether it's higher education institutions, whether it's private sector, whether it's opportunities opportunities in each of your states or each of House members' districts for ideas that we can help address this long-term personnel challenge.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a key thing for us to be able to reach out and find new ways to be able to recruit people in, because if we don't have our people in the UN, we're just leaving it open to communist China to be able to do what they're doing. And this is one of the ways they're trying to displace us as the world power, as Xi Jinping has laid out very clearly that he wants to do. So I look forward to potentially another round of questioning. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Ricketts. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Congresswoman, for your willingness to continue serving. My welcome to your family, to Matt and to Sam, who I hope will get to enjoy some of this hearing in person. And I enjoyed our conversation and look forward to working with you. I'll just continue briefly on the conversation you were just having with Senator Ricketts. I think our global network of alliances and partnerships and our values are critical to our strength, stability, prosperity, our security. And we've got a global network of allies. China does not. They have nervous neighbors, they have client states, they use coercion, but they do not have genuine allies, as we do. And so they have made a concerted effort to use the UN system to advance their interests, both their different idea and standards for human rights. We believe in an individual right to liberty. They talk about collective rights. We have different standards. We want 6G to be built out on U.S. and Western-friendly standards. They want their standards. So I couldn't agree with you more that fighting for leadership of technical organizations. In the previous Trump administration, I worked closely with his PTO director to make sure that the World Intellectual Property Organization wasn't run by a PRC national, and the ITU, as we spoke about. So I think it's critical. We do have a strategy. I worked closely with Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield on this. As the chair of the appropriating subcommittee, Senator Graham and I worked well together with her to increase funding for junior professional officers, to increase funding for the U.S. UN mission. If confirmed, will you commit to continuing this work to make sure that Americans and American-friendly leaders compete for and succeed at leading the technical organizations of the UN and compete for and succeed at staffing the junior levels of the UN?
Yes, thank you, Senator Coons, and I enjoyed our discussion. This is one of my top priorities, and this, you're seeing it came up in, as I mentioned, every single conversation. I think the success story of successfully having a candidate defeat China's candidate in the Intellectual Property Organization, that is a model that we need to continue to use in these other technical organizations. And that is, there is bipartisan support. As Tom Cotton mentioned in his opening statement, I was one of the founding members of the China Task Force, which of course led to the setting up of the bipartisan China Select Committee. So there's bipartisan interest, and I also support your approach of strengthening and building on our strong alliances, whether it is AUKUS, whether it is building on the relationships within the Quad, whether it's ASEAN. We have an opportunity to build on those organizations, I think, as partnered within the UN system.
Chairman Risch referenced the sometimes frustrating dysfunction of the UN Security Council, the fact that both Russia and China have used it to block accountability measures. The General Assembly did pass an overwhelming resolution condemning Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, but we couldn't get it through the Security Council. The Security Council did, in September, unanimously pass, because of American leadership, a resolution continuing sanctions, visa bans, an arms embargo for Sudan. So it is not completely without merit. But one of the things the Biden administration advanced was UN Security Council reform to broaden its membership, as you referenced, to include the Global South and to try and move the Security Council more into a functional body. What are your views on what you should do to continue that agenda?
Certainly when it comes to UN Security Council reform, it is very complex. It is very challenging with both Russia and China and the veto on the P5. I would want to work with this committee and, of course, the president primarily on any proposals for UN Security Council reform. In my opening statement, when I was referencing reforms, I was mostly talking about ensuring that all of our taxpayer dollars are going to UN entities that function very well. But I am open to having conversations about how to make it work better. I think we need to have a broader strategy reaching out to countries within the global south where China's made significant inroads. They've done it by building ports. They've done it through telecom. It's really been a whole of government approach. And it's obviously not the UN alone. It's working with Secretary Rubio. It's working with USAID, working with USTR, and significant economic investments that are happening in various
Don't forget the
other
DFC.
countries.
President Trump signed the BUILD Act into law in his first term. The Development Finance Corporation is a critical tool in our toolkit. Before I conclude, I just want to raise my profound concern about an executive order signed yesterday by President Trump that puts a 90-day pause on all development assistance without clarifying the scope of that. Does that include our contributions to UNICEF and the World Food Program, which I think you would recognize, you did recognize, led by Americans, broad bipartisan support, part of the key mission of the UN to promote stability and security by feeding hungry people and bringing stability? Does that include USAID support to Ukraine's energy grid as Putin continues to hammer civilians through attacks on the energy grid? AID's support for getting energy back online in the midst of winter in Ukraine is pretty critical. Does it include Jordan? A sea of stability in a whole area of chaos. Will development assistance be frozen for 90 days to Ukraine, to our development partnership in the Philippines and the Luzon corridor to compete with China's influence in the region, to Jordan? I hope we can work together to get some clarity, and I hope where there are obvious partnerships that do advance American national interests, that they will move forward quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Coons.
Thank you, Senator McCormick.
Congresswoman, it's good to see you again. My wife, Dean, and I have known you for, I think, more than 20 years, so I'm thrilled that President nominated you for this important role. Forgive my voice. I think I've been celebrating making America great again a little too much. As we discussed when we met in my office, I'm deeply troubled by the virulent anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias at the United Nations. And since Hamas's brutal massacre on October 7th, the Jewish community in Pennsylvania and across our country has seen an explosion in hate. As you know, this is not theoretical for me and for Dina. We live in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, where we had the Tree of Life tragedy, and a painful reminder of where that hate can lead. In Congress, you've done an incredible job of pushing back against anti-Semitism in our nation's institutions. You exposed the presidents of the three leading universities for their lack of moral clarity. And I was one of the first to call for the firing of the president of UPenn because of the tough questioning that you forced her and other presidents to leave office. I'm confident you can bring that same fire and effectiveness and leadership to the UN. And let me start by asking how you'll fight back against anti-Semitism and bias against Israel within the UN. Hamas terrorists have been operating with impunity from UNRWA facilities, and UNRWA employees even participated in the massacre on October 7th. So beyond funding, how will you work with our allies to end UNRWA's mandate and shift legitimate humanitarian functions to other UN organs or trusted NGOs?
Thank you so much, Senator McCormick, and thank you for your leadership combating anti-Semitism. I know it's important to the American people and it's important to Pennsylvanians, and something that I am deeply committed to doing in this role. It's one of the reasons why in my conversation with President Trump, I was interested in this position, because if you look at the anti-Semitic rot within the United Nations, there are more resolutions targeting Israel than any other country, any other crisis combined. And we have significant national Security Councils, the anti-Semitism, whether it's UN Women failing to condemn Hamas's terrorist attack and terrorist regime against innocent civilian women, using rape and targeting women specifically, taking them hostage. I am overjoyed that those 3 young women hostages were returned home. We need to stay committed to ensuring every hostage is brought home. I've met with many hostage families. This position, we need to be a voice of moral clarity on the UN Security Council and at the United Nations at large, for the world to hear the importance of standing with Israel. And I intend to do that. This year will mark the 50th year since the disgraceful Zionism is racism resolution at the United Nations. And at the time, our U.S. Ambassador, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, spoke out strongly against that disgraceful resolution. That is the type of leadership that I hope to bring, if confirmed, to the United Nations. And President Trump has a tremendous record when it comes to standing with Israel, whether it's the Abraham Accords, whether it's his commitment to combating anti-Semitism, or recognizing Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. This is a strong, strong record, and I hope to do that at the UN if confirmed.
Thank you. As is already noted, the Chinese Communist Party has a deliberate strategy to use the UN Human Rights Council and other parts of the UN system to propagate its false narrative on human rights and legitimize its authoritarian agenda. How will you push back on the CCP's attempts to co-opt international institutions like the UN to undermine U.S. interest?
Thank you. As you can see, there's quite a theme here with many senators raising this deep concern about CCP's inroads and China's inroads broadly in international organizations. I think it goes back to working with our partners and allies, making sure that we are strengthening those relationships, that we are ensuring that we have a strategy to ensure that the CCP is not able to make inroads at the most senior levels of these technical organizations and of agencies across the UN writ large. This was another of my top priorities that I expressed in each and every meeting with all of the senators from both sides of the aisle.
Thank you. And I'll try to squeeze in one last question. I was so glad that President Trump withdrew from the UN climate accords last night. How will you advocate for American energy dominance and an all of the above approach to energy security at the UN?
Again, I want to make sure that we're representing American values, American interest. I am the United States ambassador, if confirmed, to the United Nations, and that means supporting strong American energy dominance and not giving a free pass to the biggest polluters like China in the world, when we have the cleanest water, the cleanest air, and the best record when it comes to an all-of-the-above energy approach, moving back to the successful policies of President Trump in his first term, when not only was America energy independent, we were energy dominant. So that is my commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McCormick. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations, Representative Stefanik, for the nomination. I really appreciated the meeting that we had in our office. You and I have some political differences, of course, but we talked that day about items on which we agree. We had some on which we disagreed, and we had a couple of others where you said your position is one that President Trump doesn't agree with. And I like that candor, and I like the fact that we had a good exchange. I'm grappling with that and some of the partisan comments you've made in the past. An article that I'd like to put in the record, National Public Radio article, How the Replacement Theory Went Mainstream on the Political Right, from May of 2022. On Monday morning, Stefanik tweeted, "Democrats desperately want wide open borders and mass amnesty for illegals, allowing them to vote." I'd like to put that in the record.
Without objection, it will be included.
Now, that was a campaign tweet, and I can separate campaign rhetoric from governing rhetoric. I don't view things like that as disqualifying. They do raise questions. But at least we had a good meeting. We talked about important issues and shared ideas. I'm going to say something here that I wish I could have said at an Armed Services Committee hearing, but we had it in closed session. All of the Trump nominees who come before the committees on which I sit have agreed to meet with me, save one, the Secretary of Defense nominee, Pete Hegseth. He's written that he thinks Democrats are evil. He's written that he thinks Democrats are the adversary. And he refused to meet with any Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, save the chairman. Save the chairman. Yesterday, in a closed hearing, we were asked to forward his nomination to the floor, even though it had not been pending to the committee for sufficient time. My colleagues asked, hey, why would we give a waiver to someone who wouldn't even agree to meet with us? That nominee would disrespect Democrats, okay, that's fine. But I didn't think my committee colleagues on the Armed Services Committee would have disrespected us. And I'll just say to all of my Republican colleagues here, if there is ever a nominee by any president who refuses to come meet with you when you're on the committee of jurisdiction overseeing that nominee, I will publicly raise hell on your behalf. Nominees should meet with the committees, just as Representative Stefanik did. And Representative Stefanik, while I have a question about some of the campaign rhetoric, I'm not going to ask you about it because that's in the past. I do appreciate the fact that you were courteous, informed, civil, and candid in the meeting with me. I told you I had two concerns, engagement and the Western Hemisphere. You've convinced me that you were nominated for this position not to disengage, but to engage, and I appreciate that. In fact, you wanted this position, and you wouldn't have wanted it otherwise, and that's great. On the Western Hemisphere, you're going to be working with the Secretary of State we approved unanimously yesterday, our colleague, Senator Rubio. Senator Rubio talked at some length about a number of topics on the Americas the other day, and I want to ask you about one that is particularly challenging right now, and that's Haiti. The situation in Haiti is a disaster. You know that. I mean, you've been on these committees overseeing American national security, and you know that issues like Haiti create immigration challenges and all kinds of other challenges that are bad on the humanitarian front and can cause problems for allies like the Dominican Republic and cause problems for us. We now have a security operation in Haiti being led by Kenyans with the assistance of other nations, with the financial support and assistance of the United States. Senator Rubio talked at some length here on last week about how important it was that we stay engaged on that. I'd like to know kind of what your thought would be, should you be confirmed at the UN, for what the U.S. can do to try to help Haitians find a next chapter that is a peaceful one.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Kaine. Appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you. I know we serve on the National Endowment for Democracy together, and there's been significant bipartisan results delivered through that program funded by Congress. I wanted to just point out, I stand strongly for border security. And that was what the tweet you referenced was related to. And I would point out that in the sector that I represent, the Swanton sector, there was a Border Patrol officer killed in the last 24 hours.
Are there any Democratic senators that you think are for open border and mass amnesty for illegal undocumented
Well,
people?
I would point out that Democratic think tanks and rhetorics have talked
I'm
about...
asking about senators. Any Democratic senators you would level that charge against?
I think there are Democrat senators who have supported open borders. What I was doing is clarifying when you pointed out a headline from an article.
Not a headline, a quote of yours.
What which was related to border security, and we just had an overwhelming popular vote for President Trump, where border security was top of the mind.
Well,
I do stand by my. I think it's important to note. I do stand by my rhetoric, standing up for strong borders, and the American people overwhelmingly support that. Related to your question, related to Haiti.
My time is over, so let me just conclude and say this. When I've been on this committee and in the Senate, I was part of a bipartisan deal that put $46 billion of border security on the table that the House Republican majority killed, and another deal that put $25 billion of border security on the table in 2018 that President Trump killed. And I was just part of a bipartisan deal in the last year that was significant about bipartisan border security on the border that President Trump killed. The notion that Democratic senators are for open borders and allowing illegal aliens to vote is a fantasy. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you. But now I have questions about if you'd fall for a fantasy. I'm going to have that to ponder that, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I do want to address that, Chairman Risch, if you give me the latitude to do so. We are very proud that on the House side, we passed H.R. 2, the most significant border security package that Chuck Schumer failed to bring up in the Senate. That would return to the effective policies of President Trump. And again, the American people voted loudly and clearly when it came to securing our borders and the failures of the past 4 years. I'm not going to apologize for my commitment to securing the border when I represent a significant part of the U.S. A major sector, the Swanton sector, where we've had a skyrocketing of illegals crossing there. On the issue of Haiti, which I think is important, and it is a bipartisan concern, obviously it's a humanitarian significant challenge in our hemisphere. Working with Secretary Rubio, we need to have a strategy. I'm deeply concerned. It is very complex. There is no simple solution. And that is an area where we need to continue to have discussions with the committees of oversight. I'm very concerned on the Intelligence Committee briefings I've received about the crisis in Haiti. So I look to work with Secretary Rubio to support his commitment to the Western Hemisphere, specifically the complexities of the humanitarian challenges within Haiti.
Senator Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Congressman Stefanik, I just want to congratulate you for being here. I'm very pleased to see your nomination to be the next ambassador, the next United States ambassador to the United Nations, and I look forward to working with you very closely. Before I get into specific questions, I'd like to just ask you a very broad one. in terms of what your vision is for the U.S. mission to the United Nations, and in terms of our posture at the outset going in, and then where you'd like to see it 4 years later.
Thank you so much, Senator Haggerty. It is great to have worked with you over the past few years and your expertise, both having served as an ambassador in the first Trump administration and your incredible work in the U.S. Senate on this committee. My vision is making sure that we're supporting President Trump's America First, Peace Through Strength agenda, that we are good stewards of U.S. taxpayer dollars, and that we return to the founding mission of the United Nations, which is international peace and security, very much aligned with President Trump's commitment to peace and no new wars. I think there are reform opportunities that we need to work with. This committee, hearing after hearing with various ambassadors, have talked about reforms. I want to roll up our sleeves and get it done, demanding transparency and accountability, actually having the answers of where each taxpayer dollar goes within the UN, which, as Chairman Risch has referenced in previous hearings, we haven't not gotten the answer to because there's not that amount of transparency. Standing with Israel is critically important, particularly as there are hostages still being kept today by Hamas, pushing back on the CCP, and then strengthening our partnerships and allies, working with Secretary Rubio to make sure that his reform vision for the State Department, that, as he said in his hearing, this is not about reforming, it is about improving over the long term. We want to improve to deliver results.
Well, I appreciate that very much and look forward to working with you in multiple respects to make that happen. One of those areas will be through our commission to modernize and reform the State Department, that I look forward to working with Senator Coons as we co-chair that effort. Let's get to a couple of specifics. Senator McCormick touched on this. I'd like to drill a little bit deeper into UNRWA. This is a particularly problematic organization, in my view, long before the October 7th Hamas massacre took place. I've been calling for the United States to cease funding UNRWA to send a very strong message. It's been well documented that UNRWA's textbooks teach children to glorify the murder of Jews. Hamas employs UNRWA facilities. They build their own tunnels and facilities underneath them. UNRWA employees even actively participated in the massacre on October the 7th of 2023. In January 2021, the Trump administration announced that less than 5% of people registered as refugees with UNRWA actually met the internationally recognized criteria for refugee status. That demonstrates that UNRWA is a fundamental mechanism through which this Israeli-Palestinian conflict is perpetuated. President Trump rightfully stopped sending U.S. taxpayer funds to UNRWA. President Biden decided to reinstate funding without insisting on significant reform, and I was quite disappointed by that. Congress was correct, I believe, in defunding UNRWA last year. I believe the prohibition should be permanent. My question for you is, how do you think you should deal with UNRWA? How do you think we should address U.S. taxpayer funds having gone to an organization like that has been directly complicit in terrorism in the October 7th, 2023 attack?
We should never tolerate any U.S. taxpayer funds going towards terrorism. As in my question with the ranking member, Shaheen, I was one of the members that voted to defund UNRWA. I was one of the leaders in standing for that important appropriations vote, which there is a bipartisan consensus on, with significant members, Republicans, as well as some Democrats who voted to defund it. I think we can look to organizations within the UN system, such as UNHCR, such as the World Food Program, working with USAID, which are proven organizations. They still need, reform efforts and modernization, but don't have the terrorist ties that UNRWA had, particularly that were exposed during the October 7th Hamas attack against Israel, whether it was Hamas's leader Sinwar carrying an UNRWA teacher's passport, or whether it was the UNRWA office above a Hamas data center, or individuals within UNRWA who participated in the terrorist attack against Israel on October 7th. So that I fully support the president's commitment to defunding, and I'm proud to have voted for that in the Congress.
Great. Well, I have several more questions, but I just want to touch on one last one very quickly. That has to do with accountability at the World Health Organization. You take into consideration the concerns around the COVID pandemic, what happened there, the W.H.O. role there. President Trump, I believe, rightly withdrew us from supporting and funding W.H.O. President Biden put us back into that, into being a funder. In fact, the largest funder, $1.3 billion so far to that organization from United States taxpayers. What are your thoughts on the accountability that we've received so far, and where would you like to take that?
I support President Trump's decision to walk away from WHO. WHO failed on a global stage in the COVID pandemic for all the world to see. and instead spewed CCP talking points that I believe led to not only false information, but dangerous and deadly information across the globe. We cannot tolerate entities that are taken over by CCP propaganda. So I strongly support. President Trump knows when to engage and knows when to walk away. He was right in his decision to walk away from WHO, and I support that.
I was pleased to see that action yesterday as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Booker, you're up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you, and I thank you for the time that you gave me in a very hurried inaugural weekend.
Yes.
It was amazing that we were able to fit that in. And I want to echo some of my Senate colleagues who just said you are very informed and seem to be extraordinarily committed to this task and this goal, and I'm grateful for that. I want to jump in on some of the things we talked about right away. I'm so grateful for Senator Kaine bringing up Haiti and the importance for us to come up with some bipartisan foreign policy agenda or strategy to deal with that crisis there. I want to bring attention to the conflict in Sudan, which has created the largest and fastest growing humanitarian crisis in the world. We see right now tens of millions of people in need of assistance. The humanitarian crisis from hunger and malnutrition all the way to political destabilization in neighboring nations like Egypt, which are seeing this extraordinary overflow of urgencies as a result of the immigration and displaced people that are landing in that country. I'm deeply concerned about recent reporting from the New York Times stating that the SAF has used chemical weapons on at least 2 occasions. And I am really believing that we are lacking the kind of pressure on a lot of our allies and other nations that are involved in this conflict. And so this is a real time for, and as I talked about now, Secretary of State Rubio, about really aligning a diplomatic strategy in trying to bring about an end to this conflict, which will not be solved ultimately through the use of military conflict and needs a diplomatic solution. And so for now, in the short term, the need to protect civilians is paramount. And this is an issue where obviously, should you be confirmed, you can lead. And I think, in my opinion, one of the things that it's been lacking from is just a general prioritization. So first and foremost, will you commit to prioritizing Sudan and an end to this horrific humanitarian crisis and politically destabilizing reality we see now?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the great responsibilities of this role is prioritization of what we speak out against on the world stage at the United Nations. And I'm grateful for this committee's bipartisan work on the Sudan Accountability Act. The special envoy position is very important, and raising the awareness within the public of how significant this humanitarian crisis is.
And the challenge we have is there's implicated nations in supplying arms to this conflict. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about how you could use your position to try to bring about an end of the cooperative parties that are fueling the conflict.
Absolutely. I mean, we will have to have strong conversations led by the President and Secretary Rubio with the UAE, the Egyptians, the Saudis, and that will be critical. I'm not going to get ahead of the Secretary of State and the President, but certainly will be supporting them at the U.S.-UN mission to do so.
Okay, and then just the ideas of refugee assistance in the area and some of the specific, as we talked about, some of the specific UN agencies that really are the lead in providing that. And it's concerning to me, and I know I heard Senator Coons point this out, this idea of pausing some of this aid at this time for 3 months could have sort of a cataclysmic impact, not just on the humanitarian crisis, but also on the stability of some of our allies in that region. Specifically from the Chad-Sudan border to Egypt as well. Some of the life-saving work done by UNHCR, the World Food Program, and more. And I'm just wondering if you could share with the committee some of your thoughts about how to navigate the urgent importance of these UN agencies and their ongoing work.
I think, again, World Food Program is a very successful program. It's results-focused. Its significant voluntary funding piece is a testament to that and the significant bipartisan support, and it is beneficial to America from a national security perspective, but also from an agricultural perspective, from an agribusiness manufacturing perspective as well, an American workforce perspective. So I think we need to look at all of our programs, do an assessment of, do they answer the questions of, does it make America stronger, safer, more prosperous? That should be our guiding light, and America First, peace through strength. And I am very committed to ensuring that all the U.S.-UN programs that we do that assessment, and where America leads, I think we're going to come out in top in terms of the efficacy.
And I'll just say in conclusion, because my time is up, the challenge we often have is we're reactive to crises, that if investments were made early on in the stability of nations, we could have done much better. And in many ways, with this global power contest between us and the Chinese, we allow them to get advantages from our lack of even engagement or focus. The continent of Africa is the future in terms of humanity. 1 out of every 4 people on the planet Earth will be from the African continent by 2050. It seems that the Russians and the Chinese understand that because they're playing large and significant, and I would say a profoundly disrupting force there. And so having a person in the position in which you're nominated for who is focused on the continent, who is engaged and making sure that we as the United States protect our interests, things that make us safe, strong, and prosperous, and understand that as we look to the future, we have to be in now in helping to avert not only the crises that often begin to destabilize regions and cause fertile ground for terrorism and government overthrows, but also start to develop the bonds of trust and partnership that are necessary for long-term prosperity for us and many of the extraordinary nations who want to ally with us and not the Chinese. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Senator Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Ranking Member. It's great to be here. Representative Stefanik, I enjoy calling you that, at least for now. I feel like I have a little bit of advantage over so many, having served with you in the House, and bring nothing but good comments about your service there and favorable impressions of your work there. Also enjoyed serving with you on the first China Task Force, and appreciate your work in protecting Taiwan and protecting Israel. And to talk just a little bit about Taiwan first and China first, UN Resolution 2758 shifted a recognition of China at the UN from Republic of China to the People's Republic of China, but didn't really address Taiwan and their status and their sovereignty.
Snapback mechanism in the UN Security Council, Resolution 2231, to reimpose international sanctions in 2020. For that entire time, Iran was deterred from making significant advances on their nuclear program. They did not even enrich uranium above 5% or cascade advanced centrifuges. Starting in November 2020, the Iranian regime gambled that it could start rushing to a nuclear arsenal, and the incoming Biden administration would let them. Unfortunately, that proved correct. In November, the regime approved a new law calling for major nuclear advances. In January, they started enriching at 20% at Fordo, the underground enrichment bunker built into a mountain that the Obama-Iran nuclear deal left open. The incoming Biden administration responded with appeasement. In February, immediately after being inaugurated, they rushed to the UN to rescind President Trump's snapback, again allowing international sanctions to expire. For the next 4 years, the administration continually dismantled pressure on the regime and refused to impose sanctions. We know the result. Today, the Ayatollah has achieved a nuclear breakout time of 0. We now face the very real possibility of an Iranian nuclear arsenal. I do not believe that this is a threat the U.S. can tolerate, and I'm confident that both the President and Secretary of State Rubio agree. I asked Secretary of State Rubio whether he intends to go to the United Nations and again trigger the snapback mechanism as a part of his written testimony to this committee. Here was Secretary Rubio's response, quote, I believe it is in our national security interest for the UN Security Council to snap back the sanctions that were suspended under the JCPOA. I will execute the President's guidance and work with our allies to ensure that snapback takes place. First, do you agree with Secretary Rubio's assessment that it is in the national security interest of the United States to snap back those sanctions?
Yes.
Talk about how you would execute a strategy to do so, either unilaterally or working with allies.
We will have to, that will be a strategy that I develop with the National Security Council in tandem with Secretary Rubio and President Trump to work with our allies within the United Nations, within the Security Council, and there are allies that are already considering this and looking at it, and that has been publicly reported. But obviously, pushing back on Iran is a top priority. It was a success during President Trump's first term, and we've seen the catastrophic results in loss of life during the previous 4 years when you have had an emboldened Iran that has led to directly the October 7th terrorist attack against Israel and Hezbollah firing tens of thousands of rockets against Israeli civilians.
Let's move to another topic. You and I talked about the deep rot in the United Nations when it comes to supporting terrorism against America and our allies, especially Israel. As you discussed with Senator McCormick, UNRWA has for decades provided material support for Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza. The World Health Organization has also been deeply complicit in the use of hospitals by Hamas for terrorist activities, including for the holding of hostages. The complicity of these organizations deepened after October 7th. The Biden administration embraced UNRWA and the World Health Organization. Congress prohibited the Biden administration from funding UNRWA, but the administration officials circumvented that prohibition by using UNRWA infrastructure. Yesterday, the president rightly and immediately withdrew our participation from them. I think that was a critical first step, but the next step is to enable American citizens to hold these organizations accountable. We currently have a very odd legal environment where these organizations enjoy more sovereign immunity than states, and thus are shielded from accountability. Last Congress, I introduced the Liable Act and was joined by 4 current members of this committee, including, as well as, Secretary of State Rubio. The bill will allow American victims of terrorism and their family to sue international organizations that support terrorism against this. I will soon reintroduce it in this Congress. What is your understanding of the role these organizations have played in facilitating terrorism against Americans, Israelis, and our allies?
Well, UNRWA, there were individuals in UNRWA who participated, who executed and committed terrorist acts against Israel on October 7th. Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, carried an UNRWA passport. You had a Hamas data center under UNRWA headquarters. So the rot is deep. Congress made the right decision. I was proud to be one of the leaders when it came to defunding UNRWA. And I am committed to holding them accountable and working with the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House and the President if that legislation passes.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Stefanik, it's good to see you again. When we met last week, we talked about your strategy for jumping in and getting up to speed among the many career diplomats at the United Nations. What can you say here today about how you will tackle that problem set of facing people who've been there for a long time and who may have long established relationships and experience at the UN headquarters?
I think it's very important to build on their significant experience. Right now, there's the transition happening. If confirmed, I hope to dig in and gain their expertise, particularly the regional expertise that many of the officials within the State Department serving at the UN mission. It's very important, particularly in the technical aspects and some of the technical organizations and some of the regional challenges within the UN system. Typically, the deputy permanent rep is a career, although presidentially appointed, and I will support the president's nominee, but our hope is that that will bring career expertise from within the State Department and an understanding of the UN system.
Will you commit to proactively engaging the rotating members of the Security Council and investing time, particularly in relationships throughout those who represent the Global South?
Yes, that is very important. It was an issue that you and I discussed, Senator, and was actually asked in previous parts of this hearing. It's incredibly important. If you look at China's inroads in the global south, it's one of the greatest challenges that we face when you look at the UN voting habits of various countries. So we need to build upon our regional organizations and push back on Chinese influence in that region, and that starts with engagement.
Thank you. Shifting gears to Southeast Asia. The crisis in Myanmar feels like it is only escalating as the years pass since the Tatmadaw took control in 2021. Millions of people are internally displaced, and there are hundreds of thousands of Karen displaced in Thailand and nearly 1 million Rohingya displaced into Bangladesh. Although we've had UN Security Council Resolution 2669 since 2022, ASEAN's 5 points consensus since 2021, and increasing sanctions targeting the military junta, there is no sign to an end in sight for this crisis. It's also created a ripe environment for criminal activity, with cyber scam centers engaging in human trafficking and enriching themselves by targeting people with fraud. This has a major economic impact, including on people here in the United States who find themselves targeted. If confirmed as UN ambassador, what ideas would you have to get after some of the challenges that make up this really complex case? I'm not asking you to single-handedly solve the conflict, but can you touch on how you would work with regional bodies like ASEAN, especially under the Malaysian chairmanship year, or Thailand, our longest treaty ally of the United States, or the Philippines, where we have a security alliance, UN sub-agencies or other entities to break through the stalemate the world find ourselves in when it comes to Myanmar?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. This needs to be among the top priorities when it comes to standing up with human rights, and I'm grateful for the Congress and the Senate for having such a bipartisan record when it comes to standing up for human rights. I hope to return that to a top priority when the U.S. has the opportunity to chair the Security Council, and I think building on these regional organizations like ASEAN is very important. I myself led a delegation with House Armed Services Committee colleagues, House Intelligence colleagues. We went to Thailand. We have gone to other ASEAN countries on that visit and working with them within the region, because it's so important to the security in the region and the values that we strongly support in the region. You point out Thailand as our longest ally, oldest ally in the region. That's a very important relationship, and you have my commitment to continue to build on that. And I also think, ASEAN in this particular human rights challenge that you pointed out, but I think we ought to build on these international organizations like AUKUS, the Quad writ large within the UN, because I think that helps continue to expand our ability to deliver diplomatic results.
Thank you. I very much look forward to working with you in your new position. Congratulations.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you,
back, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple more follow-up questions. Let me also, though, first recognize Congressman Joe Wilson, who I'm sure is here in support of Congresswoman Stefanik. So nice to have representation from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you. Congresswoman, the UN Security Council recently renewed the mandate for EUFOR Althea in Bosnia and Herzegovina through November 2025. It's been a constant challenge, and I worry that the UN-backed peacekeeping mission is needed now more than ever, perhaps in greater force because of the Republic of Srpska leader Milorad Dodik, who is sanctioned by the U.S., and he continues his secessionist threats. So if confirmed, will you commit to building consensus for maintaining that peacekeeping mission in the long term?
Yes.
Thank you. Another area that I'm concerned about is the work of the International Organization on Migration and the UN Refugee Agency, which is supporting thousands of displaced from the Russian-occupied territory. We know we have about 7 million Ukrainian refugees globally, 3.6 million internally displaced in Ukraine. Moldova, which is sandwiched between Ukraine and has significant Russian influence, hosts refugees that are equivalent to 5% of its population. It's dependent on UN humanitarian support especially. So if confirmed, will you continue to support these critical humanitarian operations in Ukraine and Moldova?
I think it is important that we take a look at all of our UN entities and all of our UN agencies to make sure that they deliver results and represent our values. And I want to work with the National Security Council and Secretary Rubio to do an assessment, make sure that it's results focused, and get back to you once we do that. But I want to work with Marco on that.
Good. Well, that's fair. And I think it's in our interest to help ensure that those countries who are impacted by the fallout from the conflict have the support to be able to withstand Russian influence so that they don't also fall as the result of conflict. And let me also register my support for the UNIFIL mission. Again, I think it's one that we need to examine and see how we ensure that they continue to be a strong bulwark against Hezbollah and what's happening in Lebanon. But we need to ensure that there is somebody there to address the peacekeeping that needs to continue now as the result of Lebanon has actually made some real progress in getting a president in place and a prime minister who are outside of the influence of Hezbollah. I think anything we can do to ensure that continues is really important. With that said, I also want to go back to Syria because you talked a little bit about the concern about HTS and what they will continue to do in Syria has come up in the questioning. The fall of Assad probably dealt as big a blow to Iran and Russia as anything that's happened in the Middle East in recent years. And I think it's important for us to think about how we fill that vacuum, because if we don't, or if those people who support freedom, support the opportunity for self-determination for the Syrian people, then we know that Iran and Russia and other players will come back into the region. So can you talk a little bit about how you think we can ensure that humanitarian aid continues to get through into Syria and that the UN can engage to ensure that we don't have our adversaries filling that vacuum?
I'm deeply concerned about our adversaries filling that vacuum. I also think that it's important that we continue to ensure that there is not another reign, frankly, of terror against the Syrian people. It's a very complex, there are open questions, and I want to work with Secretary Rubio and President Trump to ensure we have a real verification process. Go back to Reagan, trust but verify. I think that's really, really important before I make any commitments here today. And certainly I'm not going to get ahead of the president. There is no question that Assad's fall is a major blow to Iran, and it is an opportunity in the region for a people that have been human rights abuse, have been slaughtered by the Assad regime, the use of chemical weapons, and that's over the course while I've been in Congress as we've pushed back, and I credit President Trump for his effective military response to when Assad used chemical weapons. So I think I will commit to this committee that I'm going to work with the National Security Council, but will support the president's approach in a very unique and this moment in time where there's real opportunity, but we want to make sure that there's not terror.
I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you. And again, I think time is of the essence here, and we don't have a lot of time to look at what the options are before our adversaries move in. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point, Senator Shaheen. Anything else for the good of the order? One very brief follow-up, Senator.
Just wanted to ask you, what do you see as your most important lever or levers within the United Nations, should you be confirmed as our ambassador to the UN? What are your most important levers to wield authority to bring about reform?
I think our vote on the Security Council and the fact that we are the biggest funder, we need to stand up for our values, American values at the United Nations. And I said earlier in my testimony, if confirmed, I will represent the United States. That is the responsibility, and that is what I'm hoping to do. But it's the UN Security Council vote, as well as our funding and the transparency and accountability that should come along with our funding.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you,
Chairman.
Senator Duckworth, you had a follow-up.
Yes, thank you. Just one question, Congressman Stefanik. It's really about the rights of persons with disabilities and people with disabilities around the world. I think the United States is in a very unique position to lead, and I think this is a place where you can work with other nations at the United Nations when it comes to issues that persons with disabilities face around the world, discrimination and the like. We still are dealing with unexploded ordinances from the Vietnam War in places like Laos and Vietnam and Cambodia. Have you thought a little bit about what work you would do when it comes for the issue of persons with disabilities in your role as our UN ambassador?
Absolutely, Senator, and I thank you for your leadership on this issue, working with so many senators across the aisle. I think it's a very important way that America can lead when it comes to human rights and human dignity, and I hope to bring that leadership, and I know that Secretary Rubio, during his testimony, committed to that as well from the State Department approach, so I hope to be a strong partner in doing so.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. At this point, I am going to order the letters of support and matters related thereto regarding Congressman Stefanik into the record. They will be placed in the record. I'm going to leave the record open until 5 p.m. tomorrow evening in case there are questions for the record from members of the committee. So with that, our thanks to you. Thank you for spending the time with us here today. And unless there's anything else for the good of the order, committee is adjourned.
Hi friends, Richard Karn here. Now I'm known as the guy who can fix just about anything, but the technology in most appliances requires very special training to fix. My point is, even I know when I've met my match, and that's why my family has Choice Home Warranty. So we won't get stuck with high-priced repairs.
Choice Home Warranty covers over 25 major home systems and appliances. That's your AC, heating, plumbing, kitchen and laundry appliances, and so much more.
Imagine for less than a cup of coffee a day, Choice Home Warranty can help protect you from expensive major system and appliance breakdowns that your homeowner's insurance doesn't cover. But you have to call now before it's too late.
Every homeowner should have Choice Home Warranty. Your homeowner's insurance is not going to cover your appliances.
Washing machine, dryer, refrigerator, air condition. If I had any issues arise, they were able to take care of it immediately.
Now, homeowner's insurance won't protect you when your home's major systems and appliances break down due to normal wear and tear. But Choice Home Warranty will. They can help cover repairs and replacements.
Choice Home Warranty is the best warranty we've ever used. It would save you so much money in the long run.
Hey, I'm not the only one raving about Choice Home Warranty. They were named a Best Home Warranty Company and Best Claim Service by U.S. News 360 Reviews.
Call Choice Home Warranty now and get access to a nationwide network of over 15,000 technicians and the latest appointment setting technology so you'll know when they're on their way.
If I have an issue with an appliance or something around the house, I just call up Choice Home Warranty and I don't have to worry about that.
So, do what this old DIYer did and call Choice Home Warranty now before something breaks down. Tell them I sent you and get your first month free.
Call Choice Home Warranty before it's too late and get protection for your heating, AC, plumbing, kitchen and laundry appliances, and more. Call for your free quote today. Call in the next 5 minutes and get your first month free. 800-360-6782. 800-360-6782.
This past year has been one of the hardest in MyPillow's history. It's because of you that we're making it through. My employees and I want to thank you for your continued support by extending our wholesale prices on classic MyPillows. Get standard classic MyPillows only $14.98. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.98. But it gets even better. Upgrade to a queen size MyPillow for just $18.98. king size only $1 more. Get my body pillows $29.98 and multi-use My Pillows for only $9.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of these wholesale prices, including my standard size My Pillow, originally $49.98, now only $14.98. Queens $18.98, kings only $1 more. Not only that, order $75 or more, ship absolutely free.
From all of us here at My Pillow,
thanks, America!
Welcome to NTD News Today. Here are today's top stories. President Trump's team sparked speculation with the report of a massive infrastructure announcement coming later today. Massive change is underway after President Trump signed several executive actions repealing former President Biden's policies, declaring a national emergency at the border, and ending gender ideology in schools, much more. We have details about his very first acts. Extreme cold hits the nation. The Deep South is bracing for a rare winter storm that could bring snow, sleet, and ice.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, January 21st. I'm Don Ma. First up, President Trump will make an infrastructure announcement later today. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called it massive news. Leavitt says it's going to prove that the world knows, quote, America is back. She shared the information during an interview with Fox and Friends. Leavitt says the announcement will be at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. She clarified that the initiative is unrelated to the California wildfires. The Republican president's 2016 campaign promise for a $1 trillion infrastructure package during his first term never materialized. And as one of his first acts in office, President Trump signed several executive orders at the Capital One Arena and even more back at the Oval Office. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has details on the slew of actions the president has already taken.
On President Trump's first day back in the Oval Office, he isn't holding back. He's already signed several executive orders on everything from repealing former President Biden's policies to eliminating gender ideology from public schools.
So we're going to sign executive orders. First, I'll revoke nearly 80 destructive and radical executive actions of the previous administration.
He rolled back requirements on vehicle emissions, DEI initiatives in the federal government, and bans on offshore oil and gas leases. And he's once again withdrawn the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord.
I'm immediately withdrawing from the unfair, one-sided Paris Climate Accord ripoff. The United States will not sabotage our own industries while China pollutes with impunity.
As for slimming down the federal government, the president is pausing new regulations by federal agencies, freezing all federal hiring except for essential areas like the military, and requiring federal workers to return full-time in person.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have a directive to every department and agency in the federal government to address the cost of living crisis that has cost Americans so dearly.
Trump also signed an order that ends, quote, weaponization of the government and another order preventing censorship of free speech. He put more than 1,000 Biden administration appointees on notice after midnight, writing, my presidential personnel office is actively in the process of identifying and removing over 1,000 presidential appointees from the previous administration who are not aligned with our vision to make America great again. As for immigration, the president declared a national emergency at the southern border.
This is a proclamation guaranteeing the state's protection against invasion based on the current crisis at the southern border.
He's also revived border wall construction and his Remain in Mexico policy, and designated drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And his order to address the definition of birthright citizenship has already been met with a lawsuit. A crowd flooded the D.C. jail late Monday as Trump pardoned some 1,500 January 6th defendants.
We hope they come out tonight, frankly. They're expecting it.
Several January 6th prisoners left the D.C. jail last evening. Other executive orders expanded Alaska's energy production, kept TikTok alive, and withdrew from the World Health Organization.
In addition to those executive orders that Trump signed just hours after taking the oath of office, well, the new Trump White House has listed a four-pronged list of priorities: safety, affordability, and energy, draining the swamp and bringing back American values. So this is what we can expect to see over the next 4 years of this new Trump administration. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
The World Health Organization is reacting to the U.S. withdrawal. A spokesperson said today it regrets President Trump's decision.
We hope the United States will reconsider, and we look forward to engaging in constructive dialogue to maintain the partnership between the United States of America and WHO for the benefit of the health and well-being of millions of people around the globe.
Trump announced the withdrawal yesterday. He said the Global Health Agency mishandled the COVID-19 pandemic and other international health crises. The WHO says it's too early to determine what the impact of the U.S.'s withdrawal will be. Germany's health minister said today will try to talk Trump out of his decision. Trump also signed an executive order yesterday for the United States to again withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. The UN said that the door remains open. Meanwhile, a federal judge extended the block on the Justice Department from sharing the report into the investigation of President Trump's handling of classified documents with Congress. Former Attorney General Merrick Garland has sought to share Special Counsel Jack Smith's report privately with a small group of lawmakers on the condition that they would not disclose what they learned from it. Judge Eileen Cannon dismissed the prosecution last summer, ruling Smith was unconstitutionally appointed. But that ruling is on appeal, leaving the possibility that the charges could be revived. Trump is reportedly weighing dropping the charges against his former co-defendants Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira, which could end the prosecution. Sources say presidential pardons are not being considered because that would imply guilt. Congresswoman Elisa Stefanik, President Trump's nominee for UN ambassador, testified at her Senate confirmation hearing this morning. She says the United Nations has not lived up to founding mission and calls for reform.
As outlined in Article 1, Chapter 1 of the UN Charter, the purpose of the United Nations is to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations based on a shared respect for the principle of equal rights, solve international problems, and harmonize the actions of nations in the attainment of common ends. The UN has not lived up to this founding mission, and we must demand better.
Lawmakers raised concerns about the ability of U.S. adversaries, Russia and China, to veto resolutions in the UN Security Council. Stefanik emphasized the need to reform the world body. In her opening statement, Stefanik also pledged to carry out President Trump's America First agenda. She promised to review U.S. funding to some UN agencies. The U.S. is the largest single donor to the UN. Stefanik said the U.S. must ensure that its investments make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. That echoed Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The Senate Intelligence Committee has approved John Ratcliffe's nomination as CIA director. It's urging a swift Senate vote. The committee voted 14-3 yesterday to recommend full Senate confirmation. Ratcliffe is a former director of national intelligence during the first Trump administration and a congressman from Texas. He emphasized his commitment to a merit-based system and a focus on protecting American interests. He says guarding against adversaries like China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia is especially important. Committee leaders stressed the urgency of confirming Ratcliffe given global security risks. And now a quick update on the California wildfires. CAL FIRE says 2 more fires have started, this time in San Diego. The sheriff's office issued an evacuation order this morning for a small community close to one of the fires. The county fire department said around 3:30 a.m. both fires are at 0% containment. A red flag fire weather warning will remain in effect for Los Angeles and Ventura counties until 10 a.m. Firefighters are making progress on containing the deadly Eden and Palisades fires, which have killed some 27 people. Meanwhile, the South is getting slammed with what the National Weather Service calls a generational winter storm event. Bone-chilling temperatures have 40 million people from Texas to the Carolina's under winter weather alerts. Cities not accustomed to harsh, cold weather are bracing for potentially historic snowfall. Temperatures dropped to below freezing Monday night in Texas. A blizzard warning was issued for the first time for parts of Louisiana's Gulf Coast. That area could see wind gusts of up to 35 miles per hour. Forecasters say driving conditions will be extremely dangerous. Hundreds of flights have been canceled already. Schools are closed in states including Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia. Snowfall totals are expected to break records dating back to at least 1963, possibly rivaling records set in the late 1800s. Coming up after the break, President Trump warns of major tariffs on Canada and Mexico, possibly starting February 1st, Canada's response, and a look at possible China tariffs. And the Senate passes the long-delayed Laken-Riley Act, and a controversial app used by migrants goes dark. The latest on the illegal immigration front as Trump returns to the office after these messages.
Hi friends, Richard Karn here. Now I'm known as the guy who can fix just about anything, but the technology in most appliances requires very special training to fix. My point is, even I know when I've met my match, and that's why my family has Choice Home Warranty. So we won't get stuck with high-priced repairs.
Choice Home Warranty covers over 25 major home systems and appliances. That's your AC, heating, plumbing, kitchen and laundry appliances, and so much more.
Imagine for less than a cup of coffee a day, Choice Home Warranty can help protect you from expensive major system and appliance breakdowns that your homeowner's insurance doesn't cover. But you have to call now before it's too late.
Every homeowner should have Choice Home Warranty. Your homeowner's insurance is not going to cover your appliances.
Washing machine, dryer, refrigerator, air condition. If I had any issues arise, they were able to take care of it immediately.
Now, homeowner's insurance won't protect you when your home's major systems and appliances break down due to normal wear and tear. But Choice Home Warranty will. They can help cover repairs and replacements.
Choice Home Warranty is the best warranty we've ever used. It would save you so much money in the long run.
Hey, I'm not the only one raving about Choice Home Warranty. They were named a Best Home Warranty Company and Best Claim Service by U.S. News 360 Reviews.
Call Choice Home Warranty now and get access to a nationwide network of over 15,000 technicians and the latest appointment setting technology so you'll know when they're on their way.
If I have an issue with an appliance or something around the house, I just call up Choice Home Warranty and I don't have to worry about that.
So, do what this old DIYer did and call Choice Home Warranty now before something breaks down. Tell them I sent you and get your first month free.
Call Choice Home Warranty before it's too late and get protection for your heating, AC, plumbing, kitchen and laundry appliances, and more. Call for your free quote today. Call in the next 5 minutes and get your first month free. 800-360-6782. 800-360-6782.
This past year has been one of the hardest in MyPillow's history. It's because of you that we're making it through. My employees and I want to thank you for your continued support by extending our wholesale prices on classic MyPillows. Get standard classic MyPillows only $14.98. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.98. But it gets even better. Upgrade to a queen size MyPillow for just $18.98. King size only $1 more. Get my body pillows $29.98 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of these wholesale prices, including my standard size MyPillow, originally $49.98, now only $14.98. Queens $18.98, Kings only $1 more. Not only that, orders $75 or more ship absolutely free.
From all of us here at MyPillow,
thanks America!
Welcome back. Donald Trump beginning his new administration in a big way, issuing about 200 executive orders just hours after taking the oath of office. NTD's Chris Beers joins us at the desk with details. Chris, always great to have you. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio today. If you could, tell us about these official documents that Trump is signing.
Don, it's good to see you. Yeah, so the first words in Donald Trump's inaugural address were, "The golden age of America begins right now." And just a few hours later, he issued over 200 executive orders. Compare that to Biden's 9 executive orders on his first day. He talked about, he issued orders on border, domestic energy production, as well as the question of gender circulating in the U.S. Trump outlined his aims in his inaugural address. Let's watch that.
Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end.
Don, there's over 200 executive orders. I would list them all for you, but I think we might be here a while, and our audience might get a little bored just hearing me list things. But I do want to list a few of them. He declared a national emergency at the southern border, pardoned over 1,500 January 6th prisoners from January 6, 2021, the Capitol incident. He withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. He declared that there are only two genders, male and female, a question that he's brought up numerous times in his campaign speeches. He undid dozens of Biden-era executive orders, 78 or so executive orders, memorandums, and such. He required all federal workers to return to in-person work. No more working from home for federal workers. He ordered the flags to be flown at full staff. That's after Biden ordered them to be flown at half staff through the period that included the inauguration in honor of the late Jimmy Carter president. He issued a directive to the federal government ordering, quote, the restoration of freedom of speech and preventing government censorship of free speech going forward, and a lot more.
And Chris, let me just add one more to that list that you didn't mention, but Trump actually said it was a big one, and that was the executive order ending birthright citizenship in the United States. And I think minutes or perhaps within hours after that executive order was issued, lawsuits came flooding in. A reporter asked Trump about whether he expected perhaps this would happen. And to me, Trump may have actually suggested that he knew some lawsuits could potentially be coming, but that's just speculation on my part. That's my interpretation, at least. But I also wanted to talk to you about the border crisis. That is one of the first issues that Trump mentioned in his inaugural address. What executive orders is he issuing on that front?
Well, to that end, dealing with the border crisis and specifically the question of immigration, he did deal with the birthright citizenship question that you mentioned. People born in the U.S. whose parents are not citizens will no longer be considered U.S. citizens from the time that this executive order was issued. Going on, he declared a national emergency at the southern border, which means that he can actually just use federal funds to finish the border wall without congressional approval. He declared Mexican drug cartels foreign terrorist organizations. And I was listening in to the Oval Office when he was signing that, and Fox News reporter Doug Ducey essentially asked him whether or not that rules out sending troops, U.S. military troops, into Mexico to deal with these newly declared foreign terrorist organizations, as the U.S. has done with other terrorist organizations, ISIS in Syria, for example, sending rockets to annihilate the leader there. And Trump did not rule that out. He didn't say that he would do it or not, but it's not off the table. He brought back Remain in Mexico, which of course is from his first administration. Basically, anybody who's trying to get into the U.S. through Mexico and arriving at the southern ports of entry in the southern border of the U.S. has to remain in Mexico if they're seeking asylum and wait for their court proceeding to play out. There's probably going to be more, there could be more this week. I mean, Trump's talking about a huge first day. He definitely delivered on that in terms of executive orders. He's talking about a big first week and a big first 100 days. So yeah, we could see a lot more.
Well, big week, big 100 days, but also a very big first day, right? With so many executive orders and everything else that's happening. But I want to ask you a real quick question on the birthright citizenship being ended by one executive order. Yeah. You mentioned that it's from the effective date onwards. That means it's not retroactive, right? Just a quick response from you.
That's right. Yes, that's exactly what I'm hearing.
Okay, so you were actually there at Washington, D.C. covering this event. You have a lot more information than I do. Chris, can you share your experience, just being there?
Yeah, Don, it was actually my first time at the Washington, D.C. office there. I was sitting there working at my desk in preparation for the 1 to 3 p.m. show that I hosted. And I'm looking to the left, there's like a window just right next to me. And I can see the Capitol, the rotunda of the Capitol building about 1,000 feet away. One of the most notable things was that before the swearing-in ceremony, there was clouds in the sky, right? And then just as soon as the swearing-in ceremony with Vice President J.D. Vance, the clouds parted and sun hit the rotunda of the Capitol building. And it was just a moving experience just seeing that unfold.
Yeah, sounds like a very positive and welcoming omen to start off the first day of the Trump administration. But as we're speaking now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is speaking to staff at the State Department. And this is upon his arrival after swearing into office. Take a listen.
Mr. Secretary, welcome to the department. Distinguished Mrs. Rubio, yes, yeah, Want to give a special greeting to Mrs. Rubio, yes. To your family, to your children, distinguished guests, members of Congress, on behalf of the nearly 80,000 strong officers who are serving the Department of State, a warm welcome. Mr. Secretary, your career exemplifies a life of public service, advocating for core American interests all over the globe. In these challenging times, we need principled, strong leadership. And that is why we are so happy to have you with your experience, your dedication, and your energy to lead us. Thank you. Your team, who are obviously very happy to see you, have proudly supported so many of your trips abroad, where you've advanced security in the Middle East, helped us to sustain our counterterrorism fight, and inspired so many with your walk across the Simón Bolívar Bridge. Mr. Secretary, the men and women of this department are ready to get to work, advancing the agenda of President Trump and of yourself. And with that, I will welcome you to the Department of State. Colleagues, the 72nd Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a blessing and an honor to be with all of you today. And I want to introduce you to my family. I want you to meet them. We've been able to manage them for the last 20-some years and counting. And so I said this earlier today when the Vice President swore me in. My most important job, I believe the most important job any of us will ever have, is the job we do at home. And I don't mean that both here at home domestically in our politics, but in our lives. And I'm very proud of my wife, my 4 children, and their support. My wife, Jeanette, who... her parents immigrated here from Colombia. Anybody here from Colombia? Anybody cover Colombia? And then my oldest daughter, Amanda. Say hello, Amanda. And then came Daniela. And now Anthony. And our youngest, Dominic. So these three are in school, meaning, you know, college and even jobs. We're still working. He's doing good. He's a junior in high school, and obviously my family beyond that is here, who made this possible. Jeanette's mom, Maria, is here, and my sisters Barbara and Veronica are here, and a lot of friends that came from Miami who joined us here today, and I'm grateful. And thank you. I also want to recognize my former colleagues from the congressional branch, who also happen to be appropriators and authorizers, and so I thought it was important. 3 people I've known for a long time, and by coincidence, Florida is very well represented in the authorization and appropriations in the House. Mario Diaz-Balart, who I've known as a personal friend. We served together in the Florida legislature. In fact, sat next to each other on the floor. Who would have thought, Mario, back in the day? And now here we are, you know, and 2 Cuban Americans. If we had a third, they'd call it a conspiracy, but there's only 2, so we're in shape. Congresswoman Lois Frankel, we also served in the legislature together. Again, I know this... I know it looks suspicious. She just happens to be from Florida as well, and she happened to be on that committee. And then, of course, my colleague, Brian Mast, thank you for being here as well. I have asked them as a personal favor to be nice to each of you who we send over to testify and appear before their committees. So, and to be nice to us when they write those appropriations bills and pass those laws. But we are great. I'm really grateful you would join us, because our partnership will be critically important. I want to thank President Trump for nominating me. This is an extraordinary honor and a privilege to serve in this role, to be here, frankly, to oversee the greatest, the most effective, the most talented, the most experienced diplomatic corps in the history of the world resides in this building. And it's important to remember that obviously they serve our national interest and our foreign policy. They also serve Americans. And as a member of the Senate, we often would get calls, for a brief period of time, panicked calls about passports. As you remember that era, when everyone forgot their passport expired and their cruise was on Saturday and it's Friday, 5 p.m. So we were, why are you guys chuckling? Is that, you know it's true, it happened. And then, of course, but we also serve Americans that sometimes find themselves overseas and lost their passport, or even worse, something terrible or tragic happened and their families are impacted by it. And so it's important. It's an important task, and one that I know is critical to our mission. Beyond that, this is the face of the United States. In fact, if you think about it, for many people on this planet, their only interaction with America, most will never travel here, their only interaction with America in many cases, whether they be leaders or everyday people, will be the men and women who serve us abroad and do so with tremendous integrity and dedication. They are literally the face of our country, whether it's through the aid we've provided or through the services. I also want to say hello, and is this being live streamed somewhere? Are people watching this in all of our missions? Good. I want to thank them. I know they can't be with us here today, and depending on where they are in the world, it's probably not as cold as it's been, at least for a Floridian. So I also think the brilliance of this organization shows by hosting these events indoors, which it's already showing, and we're grateful for that as well. But I want to tell you that I want to thank you, all those who are serving overseas and abroad, some in places that are strong and stable and others that are more tenuous and dangerous. And I want to do something also special. I want to also thank the locally employed staff, the nationals of those countries who work with us. Without their help, without their support, it would be impossible for us to conduct our mission. And in many ways, years later, I've literally run into people in the United States that are either conducting business or visiting as tourists or what have you, and they will tell me they were locally employed they were local employees of our missions abroad, and as a result, their love for our country is never ending. I am new to this department. Today is my first day on the job, literally, but I am not a stranger to it. I've interacted with many of you, both in my travels abroad and in our daily functions. My job now is different, and our job in some ways will be different. In our republic, the voters decide the course of our nation, both domestically and abroad, and they have elected Donald J. Trump as our president when it comes to foreign policy on a very clear mission. And that mission is to ensure that our foreign policy is centered on one thing, and that is the advancement of our national interest, which they have clearly defined through his campaign as anything that makes us stronger or safer or more prosperous. And that will be our mission. That will be our job across the world, is to ensure that we have a foreign policy that advances the national interest of the United States. I expect every nation on earth to advance their national interests. And in those instances, and I hope there will be many, in which our national interest and theirs align, we look forward to working with them. This is in many ways, and again it was referenced by President Trump yesterday in his speech, that he designs that his overriding goal for global policy is the promotion of peace, the avoidance of conflict. And no agency will be more critical in that regard than this one. In fact, it's its founding principle and purpose. And that's what we endeavor to do, to promote peace around the world, because that's in our national interest. Without peace, it is hard to be a strong nation, a prosperous nation, and one that is better off. But there will also be challenges. We recognize that there will be those times, unfortunately, as humans interact with one another because of our nature. But there will be conflict. We will seek to prevent them and avoid them, but never at the expense of our national security, never at the expense of our national interest, and never at the expense of our core values as a nation and as a people. We are, at the end of the day, a nation founded on a powerful principle. And that powerful principle is that all men are created equal, because our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws, not from our governments. And we hope the entire world can one day live under that, and we will always, always be strong defenders of that principle. Never at the expense of our national interest, never at the expense of pragmatic foreign policy, never at the expense of the reality that oftentimes in foreign policy our choices are not between a bad option and a good option. Sometimes in foreign relations, our options are two bad ones, and we're just trying to figure out which one of them is least bad. And that's unfortunate, but it is true. And that's a tough job. It's our job. And we'll seek to do it right and well. That is the core mission of this agency, and it will be the core mission while Donald Trump is president. And we will be effective on his behalf. I also want this agency to be, and I don't mean, not that it's irrelevant now, but I want it to be where it belongs. I want the Department of State to be at the center of how America engages the world. Not just how we execute on it, but on how we formulate it. Some of the brightest minds in foreign policy reside within this building and within this government. And we need to ensure that we have an environment here that's conducive to creativity, to boldness, to new ideas, to recognizing the dynamic world in which we live, one that is changing faster than it has ever changed before. And we need to be ahead of it. When the time comes for the principals to gather, or even deputies, I want the Department of State to have the best ideas and the best options available for the president. And then I want us to be able to execute them better than any agency in our government. That will also be a task of mine. I have watched from the congressional side from time to time administrations in both parties, in which sometimes the Department of State has been sort of relegated to a secondary role because some other agency can move faster or seems to be bolder or more creative. It's not your fault, but we're going to change that. We want to be at the centerpiece. We want to be at the core of how we formulate foreign policy, because we're going to have the best ideas of any agency, and because we're going to execute it better and faster and more effectively than any other agency in our government. And I know we have the right team to do it. There's no other agency in the world, there's no other agency in our government that I'd rather lead, because of the talent that's collected here in this room and those watching around the world. That will be our mission, and I hope we'll be able to do it together. There will be changes, but the changes are not meant to be destructive. They're not meant to be punitive. They're not out of... The changes will be because we need to be a 21st century agency that can move by a cliche that's used by many at the speed of relevance. But we need to move faster than we ever have because the world is changing faster than we ever have. And we have to have a view that some say it's called look around the corner, but we really need to be thinking about where are we going to be in 5, 7, 10, or 15 years. Some of the issues that confront humanity today have no precedent. They have no historic precedent. Some of the challenges we face have no historic precedent. We can compare it to another era, to another time, but they're not the same. Things are moving faster than ever. Think about how much the world has changed in the last 5 years. Imagine how much it will change over the next 25 years. And my sincerest hope and my prayer is that we will, as a nation, be able to leave the future generations with a country and a planet safer and better than the one that was left for us. And you will be a big part of achieving that goal. It is an honor to be able to lead this agency. I hope to do it with distinction and with integrity, working harder than anyone ever has at this role. And that will not be easy because some pretty hardworking people have come before me. But I know that we are up to the task. And I'm glad that I'm in the job, on day one. I was sworn in at about 9:15. I didn't mess up the oath. And we're ready to go to work, and I know you are as well. Thank you. God bless all of you. God bless our country. Thank you.
The Chinese Communist Party is exposing its hand. The fingerprints can be found all over. And I recently caught wind of these CCP operations on full display in South Korea. The top 13 theaters all rejected Shen Yun almost simultaneously. What makes the case in South Korea so different? And how does the CCP extend its influence into other countries? Now, for the Chinese Communist Party, this is warfare. War being waged here isn't being done through tanks and bombs, but instead through the invisible forces of culture and ideology. They also revealed a hidden war.
I'm Jonathan Lawson. If you're 50 to 85, I have an important message about security. Write down the number on your screen so you can call when I finish. The lock I want to talk to you about isn't the one on your door. This is a lock for your life insurance, a rate lock that guarantees that once you're insured, your rate can never go up at any time for any reason. But be careful. Many policies you see do not have one. But you can get a lifetime rate lock from Colonial Penn. Call this number to learn more. This plan was designed with a rate lock for people on a fixed income who want life insurance that fits their budget and is simple to get. Coverage options start at $9.95 a month, less than 35 cents a day. Act now, and your rate will be locked in for life. It will never increase, guaranteed. This is lifelong coverage that can never be canceled as long as you pay your premiums, guaranteed. And your acceptance is guaranteed, with no health questions. You cannot be turned down because of your health. Call for your information kit and read about this rate lock for yourself. You'll also get a free beneficiary planner. Both are free with no obligation. Don't miss out. Call for information, then decide. Read about the 30-day 100% money-back guarantee. Don't wait. Call this number now.
Call now and you'll also get this free beneficiary planner. Use this valuable guide to record important information and your final wishes, and it's yours free just for calling. So don't wait. Call 1-800-357-4821 for your free information. That's 1-800-357-4821. There's no risk or obligation. That number again is 1-800-357-4821. That's 1-800-357-4821. 1-800-357-4821. Call now.
Donald Trump beginning his new administration in a big way, issuing about 200 executive orders just hours after taking the oath of office. NTD's Chris Beers joins us at the desk with details. Chris, always great to have you. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio today. If you could, tell us about these official documents that Trump is signing.
Don, it's good to see you. Yeah, so the first words in Donald Trump's inaugural address were, "The golden age of America begins right now." And just a few hours later, he issued over 200 executive orders. Compare that to Biden's 9 executive orders on his first day. He talked about, he issued orders on border, domestic energy production, as well as the question of gender circulating in the U.S. Trump outlined his aims in his inaugural address. Let's watch that.
Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end.
Don, there's over 200 executive orders. I would list them all for you, but I think we might be here a while, and our audience might get a little bored just hearing me list things. But I do want to list a few of them. He declared a national emergency at the southern border, pardoned over 1,500 January 6th prisoners from January 6, 2021, the Capitol incident. He withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. He declared that there are only 2 genders, male and female, a question that he's brought up numerous times in his campaign speeches. He undid dozens of Biden-era executive orders, 78 or so executive orders, memorandums, and such. He required all federal workers to return to in-person work. No more working from home for federal workers. He ordered the flags to be flown at full staff. That's after Biden ordered them to be flown at half staff through the period that included the inauguration in honor of the late Jimmy Carter president. He issued a directive to the federal government ordering, quote, "the restoration of freedom of speech and preventing government censorship of free speech going forward," and a lot more.
And Chris, let me just add one more to that list that you didn't mention, but Trump actually said it was a big one, and that was the executive order ending birthright citizenship in the United States. And I think minutes or perhaps within hours after that executive order was issued, lawsuits came flooding in. A reporter asked Trump about whether he expected perhaps this would happen. And to me, Trump may have actually suggested that he knew some lawsuits could potentially be coming, but that's just speculation on my part. That's my interpretation, at least. But I also wanted to talk to you about the border crisis. That is one of the first issues that Trump mentioned in his inaugural address. What executive orders is he issuing on that front?
Well, to that end, dealing with the border crisis and specifically the question of immigration, he did deal with the birthright citizenship question that you mentioned. People born in the U.S. whose parents are not citizens will no longer be considered U.S. citizens from the time that this executive order was issued. Going on, he declared a national emergency at the southern border, which means that he can actually just use federal funds to finish the border wall without congressional approval. He declared Mexican drug cartels foreign terrorist organizations. And I was listening in to the Oval Office when he was signing that, and Fox News reporter Doug Ducey asked him whether or not that rules out sending troops, U.S. military troops, into Mexico to deal with these newly declared foreign terrorist organizations, as the U.S. has done with other terrorist organizations, ISIS in Syria, for example, sending rockets to annihilate the leader there. And Trump did not rule that out. He didn't say that he would do it or not, but it's not off the table. He brought back Remain in Mexico, which of course is from his first administration. Basically, anybody who's trying to get into the U.S. through Mexico and arriving at the southern ports of entry in the southern border of the U.S. has to remain in Mexico if they're seeking asylum and wait for their court proceeding to play out. There's probably going to be more, there could be more this week. I mean, Trump's talking about a huge first day. He definitely delivered on that in terms of executive orders. He's talking about a big first week and a big first 100 days. So yeah, we could see a lot more.
Well, big week, big 100 days, but also a very big first day, right? With so many executive orders and everything else that's happening. But I want to ask you a real quick question on the birthright citizenship being ended by one executive order. Yeah. You mentioned that it's from the effective date onwards. That means it's not retroactive, right? Just a quick response from you.
That's right. Yes, that's exactly what I'm hearing.
Okay, so you were actually there at Washington, D.C. covering this event. You have a lot more information than I do. Chris, can you share your experience, just being there?
Yeah, Don, it was actually my first time at the Washington, D.C. office there. I was sitting there working at my desk in preparation for the 1 to 3 p.m. show that I hosted. And I'm looking to the left, there's like a window just right next to me. And I can see the Capitol, the rotunda of the Capitol building about 1,000 feet away. One of the most notable things was that before the swearing-in ceremony, there was clouds in the sky, right? And then just as soon as the swearing-in ceremony with Vice President J.D. Vance, the clouds parted and sun hit the rotunda of the Capitol building. And it was just a moving experience just seeing that unfold.
And that's all for today. For around-the-clock original news coverage, watch us live at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. If you have any feedback, please email us and be sure to stick around for NTD Newsroom at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll cover more stories from the U.S. and around the world. Thank you for watching.
The annual clearance event is going on now at Mathis Home with doorbuster prices in